Welcome to the OK Book Club, where we dive into books, stories, people, and tons of different topics. And today I will tell you the story of the blind men and the elephants. This is originally a parable. And a parable, my friends, is interesting because it's different than a fable. A fable, generally speaking, like Aesop's fables, bringing animals to life and telling morals at the end of the story. A parable is not about animals. It's a story, a short story, about humans. And there's not explicitly a moral at the end of the story, or not one that's written into the story. It's up to the reader, us, to figure out what the story means. And as you know, throughout all these stories that I've told on this podcast, friends, every story has its own purpose, its own meaning, right? Life lessons. And it's up to us to kind of figure out which one is really applicable in each of these stories. But generally speaking, there's always usually one overriding moral. And this one is definitely a famous story. And what's interesting for today, friends, I will read the original story that, like I said, goes back to 500 BC, in the time of Buddha. It's a Buddha text. Originally, it came out in this particular Buddhist text called the Titha Sutta. And no doubts, Buddha will be the topic of a future episode. And parables will also be a future episode. Another famous parable that we all know that definitely goes along with messages is The Boy Who Cried Wolf, right? So this particular story, I will also, on the back end of telling you the story, friends, there was a poem that was released in 1872 by John Gottfried Sachs. And he adapted this story in his own way. And from the English tradition, this really is probably one of the best known versions of this particular story because it's a poem. And this gentleman, John Gottfried Sachs, is deserving of his own episode. What an interesting man. When he issued this, knowing the year, friends, this is 10 years after, almost 10 years after the Civil War ended. And certainly you can take a lot of lessons that the story delivers in terms of what happened in our country with the North going to war against the South. But back to India in ancient times, the blind men and the elephant. Long ago, 6 old men lived in a village in India, and each, unfortunately, was born blind. So many of the villagers loved the old men and kept them away from harm. Since the blind men couldn't see the world for themselves, they had to imagine what was out there on their own. They listened carefully to the stories told by plenty of people so they could learn about life outside their village. The men were curious about many of the stories that they heard, and they were absolutely positively curious about these elephants that they heard about. They were told that elephants could trample people and other animals through forests, that they could carry huge items, that they could frighten old people and young people with their loud calls as if it was a trumpet. So these 6 blind men stood by a roadside every day asking for money from the people who passed by. The story of the elephants was still in their head. They still dreamed and they wondered, right? They had never seen any. Of course they couldn't see them. They were blind. But one morning, an elephant came down the road where they were all standing. They were told that the great beast was before them, and they asked to stop the elephants so that they might, in fact, figure them out, see them, feel them, hear them, right? Of course they couldn't see them with their own eyes, but they thought maybe by touching them they could learn what kind of animal this was. The first blind man put his hand on the elephant's side. Well, now I know all about this beast. He's exactly like a wall. The second blind man felt the elephant's tusk. Oh, come on, you're mistaken. It's not a wall. It's round and smooth and sharp. This animal's more like a spear than anything else. The third blind man took hold of the elephant's trunk. Come on, both of you are wrong. Anybody who knows anything can see that this elephant is like a snake. The fourth blind man reached out his arms and grasped one of the elephant's legs. Oh, how blind you all are. I clearly can understand what this beast is. It's plain to me that it's round and tall like a tree. And the fifth blind man, he came and he held on to the elephant's ear. The blindest man ought to know that this beast is not like anything that you name. It's exactly like a huge fan. Finally, the sixth blind man, after some time, he couldn't see or couldn't feel anything. And then he at last sees the elephant's tail. Come on, you fools. Surely you have lost all your senses. This elephant is not like a wall or a spear or a snake or a tree or a fan. This animal is exactly like a rope. Then the elephant moved on, and the six blind men sat by the roadside and argued all day and all night about this beast, each believing that he knew exactly what the animal was like, what it looked like, who it was, what its purpose was, everything about this elephant. And boys and girls, people who have eyes sometimes act just as foolishly. So now, my friends, let's go to the famous poem that many of us that grew up knew from John Gottfried Sachs. It was 6 men of Hindustan to learning much inclined who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy his mind. The first approached the elephant, and happening to fall against his broad and sturdy side, at once began to bawl. Bless me, it seems the elephant is very like a wall. The second, feeling of his tusk, cried, Ho! What have we here, so very round and smooth and sharp? To me it's mighty clear, this wonder of an elephant is very like a spear. The third approached the animal, and happened to take the squirming trunk with his hands, then boldly up and spake. I see, quoth he, the elephant is very much like a snake. The fourth stretched out his eager hand and felt about the knee. What most this mighty beast is like is mighty plain, quoth he. 'Tis clear enough the elephant is very like a tree. The fifth, who chanced to touch the ear, said, Even the blindest man can tell what this resembles most. Deny the fact who can, this marvel of an elephant is very like a fan. The sixth no sooner had begun about the beast to grope, than seizing on the swinging tail that fell within his scope, I see, cried he, the elephant is very much like a rope. And so these men of Hindustan disputed loud and long, each of his own opinion exceeding stiff and strong, though each was partly in the right, and all were in the wrong. So again, friend, pause the podcast here. Think about what the message is. Think about what the moral is that you can apply to your life. A definite great story. And what is it that this story relates to us? We've talked again throughout many stories in this podcast. We all have a different point of view. We all have a different viewpoint. We see facts. We see truths in different ways. We're all the same, but we're all different. We can all come to different conclusions. We all have empathy, and we all have different perspectives on how we see things. And friends, more than any other time, it's important to understand this. It's important to see each other for where they are. We will all disagree, but we have to agree to disagree. So this story, you can always relate in the future, friends. Bring it up with anybody that you come to an argument about, anybody that you come to see that has a clearly different opinion than yourself, and relay this story just like you can relay easy stories of Aesop's fables. Hey, reality is a funny thing. Reality is from what you see as your truth, and we all have to be able to understand our own viewpoints, our own point of view, our own perspectives. Boys and girls, this has been the OK Book Club, another fantastic story. As always, reach out to me at kevmok21@gmail.com. Leave a nice review for me on Apple Podcast. And until next time, have fun and keep learning.